Retirement is supposed to be a celebration, a moment to honor years of hard work. But when I stood at my own retirement party, the sound that filled the room wasn't applause, it was laughter. My coworkers, they laughed at me. For a moment, I felt small, invisible, like all those decades meant nothing. But what they didn't know, what I had written in a letter sealed and waiting for HR to read, would change everything in that room. Stay with me, because this is a story they'll never forget. I had circled the date on my calendar months before. My retirement party. 42 years at the same company, longer than some of my coworkers had been alive. I imagined the moment often, the speeches, the handshakes, maybe even a few kind tears. That morning, I pressed my best suit, polished my shoes, and carried myself with the quiet pride of someone who had given his life's work to one place. I wasn't expecting a parade, but I thought, at the very least, I'd be respected. The conference room was decorated with balloons and a banner that read, "Happy Retirement." A table of sheet cake and soda stood to the side. People clapped politely when I walked in, but I noticed the whispers too, the sideways glances. I brushed them off. Maybe I was just nervous. The speeches began. My manager said a few words, short, generic, like he was reading a script he hadn't rehearsed. He mentioned my long service and dedication, but his eyes never quite met mine. Still, I smiled and nodded. Then, one by one, coworkers chimed in. At first, it seemed harmless, light jokes, little stories. But soon the tone shifted. They laughed about how slow I typed compared to the kids fresh out of college, and they laughed about me refusing to use every new app that came along. One joked that I was practically part of the office furniture. Another added that they were shocked I lasted this long without falling asleep at the desk. The room roared with laughter, and there I stood, smiling on the outside but shrinking on the inside. Each laugh felt like a punch. Not a single mention of the projects I had saved, the nights I stayed late, the weekends I came in to meet deadlines. Not a word about the young employees I had mentored, who now led teams of their own. Just jokes. Just laughter. I glanced around the room. Some faces were red from laughing too hard. Others avoided my eyes, uncomfortable but unwilling to speak up. And in that moment, I felt invisible. Disposable, like 4 decades had been reduced to a punchline. I gripped the edge of the table, my cake untouched. My chest tightened, but I swallowed the lump in my throat. If I spoke, my voice would crack. If I walked out, they'd only laugh harder. So I stood there, listening to them turn my career into a comedy act. But what they didn't know, what no one in that room knew, was that I had written a letter addressed to HR, sealed in an envelope. It wasn't a complaint about the jokes. It was something much bigger, a truth I had carried quietly for years, waiting for this very day. As the laughter echoed around me, I reminded myself, just wait. Your time is coming. They think you're the joke, but the real story hasn't been told yet. I took a deep breath, straightened my shoulders, and forced a calm smile. Let them laugh. Because when HR read my letter, not a single person in that room would be laughing anymore. As I stood there, forced to laugh along at my own retirement party, memories began flooding in, decades of them. I thought about my first day on the job. I was younger then, nervous but determined, wearing a cheap tie and carrying a briefcase that looked too big for me. Back then, the company was smaller, scrappier, and every hand counted. I worked hard, soaking up everything I could, staying late without being asked because I wanted to prove myself. Over time, I did more than prove myself. I became dependable. When a deadline loomed and everyone panicked, they called me. When systems crashed, they called me. When new hires struggled, I was the one they paired them with. I wasn't the loudest in the room, but I was steady. Reliable, the one who kept the wheels turning when others faltered. And yet, looking back, I realized how invisible that made me too. People notice fireworks. They don't notice the foundation holding up the building. There were projects, big ones, that nearly sank the company. One, in particular, kept me awake for weeks. We were losing clients because of a technical flaw no one could solve. I stayed long after everyone went home, poring over data, rewriting reports, testing fixes until finally I cracked it. That solution didn't just fix the flaw. It saved our biggest account. But when the celebration came, it wasn't my name in the email announcement. It was my manager's. He got the credit, the handshake from the executives. And me? I got a nod in the hallway. I told myself it didn't matter. I told myself the reward was in knowing I had saved jobs, maybe even the whole company. But that doesn't mean the sting wasn't there. There were other moments, too. Times when coworkers called in sick, leaving piles of unfinished work. I covered for them, quietly, without complaint. Times when a new software rollout threatened to overwhelm everyone. I taught myself how it worked, then taught others, patiently, step by step, until the panic eased. But those efforts don't make for funny stories at retirement parties. No one laughs about the nights you miss dinner with your family because you're fixing someone else's mistakes. No one claps for the steady hand that keeps the storm from sinking the ship. And maybe that was my mistake. I never demanded recognition. I never fought for the spotlight. I just kept showing up, doing my job, believing that someday it would be enough. But enough for who? Certainly not for the coworkers now laughing at me. To them, I was just the old guy who never learned Slack fast enough, the one who didn't care about trendy jargon or flashy presentations. They didn't care that while they were clocking out at 5, I was still there, quietly making sure the reports balanced, the data lined up, the company stayed afloat. And then there was the mentoring. So many fresh graduates walked through those doors over the years, nervous, uncertain, overwhelmed. I saw myself in them. I took them under my wing, showed them the ropes, encouraged them when they stumbled. Many of them grew into leaders, respected and admired. Sometimes they remembered to thank me. Often they didn't. As the party droned on, I thought about all those moments, the invisible hours, the unseen sacrifices, the quiet victories. They had laughed at me, yes, but I knew something they didn't. The letter sitting in HR's hands contained the truth about what I had done. Not in bitterness, but in facts. Documented, undeniable. Decades of contributions, sacrifices, and results they had overlooked. That letter was my voice, finally refusing to be drowned out. And when it was read, they would all realize that the man they dismissed as too old, too slow, too stuck in his ways was the very man who had been holding their world together. The laughter still echoed in my ears when the door to the conference room opened. In walked Maria from HR, holding a plain white envelope in her hand. She smiled politely, then cleared her throat. "I was asked to read something on behalf of our retiree today," she said, lifting the envelope slightly. "A letter." The room grew quiet. Chairs creaked as people shifted uneasily. I stood a little taller, though my heart pounded. That envelope had been sitting in HR for weeks, sealed, waiting for this moment. Maria unfolded the paper and began to read. The first words silenced the smirks. "To my colleagues, and to those who will remain after I leave. You may know me as the man who stayed in the background, who kept to himself, who seemed slower than the pace of your new world. But what you may not know is what I carried, quietly, for all of you." I watched as eyes turned toward me, some curious, some wary. The letter continued. "For years, I was the one who handled the reports after hours, so no one would walk into chaos the next morning. I was the one who kept the clients calm when contracts nearly fell apart. When a major account nearly slipped away 5 years ago, I was the one who saved it, not for recognition, but because it mattered to the people who worked here, to you." A murmur spread through the room. I could see people exchanging glances, the color draining from the faces of those who had laughed loudest. Maria's voice didn't waver. "I trained dozens of you, some now in leadership positions. You may not remember every conversation, but I remember each of your first days. I stayed late when you struggled. I reviewed your mistakes so you wouldn't be embarrassed. I gave you the confidence to keep going. My fingerprints are on your success, even if my name isn't." The silence was heavy now. Forks hovered over plates of cake, forgotten, and then the part I knew would land hardest. "I do not share this to boast. I share it because for too long, people like me, quiet, steady, unglamorous, are overlooked. We are the ones mocked as out of date, too old, too slow. Yet without us, much of what you celebrate today would never have existed. So before you laugh, I ask only this. Look a little closer. Respect the invisible work, because one day someone will do the same for you." Maria folded the letter and looked up. The room was still, every set of eyes locked on me. No laughter now. Just shame, respect, and something else. Realization. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. The words had done the work. Finally, my manager cleared his throat, his face pale. We owe you more than we've given you credit for," he said, softly. Others nodded. Some couldn't meet my eyes. A few of the younger employees looked stunned, as if seeing me for the first time. I simply smiled, calm and steady. For the first time that day, I felt tall again. Seen, the jokes, the laughter, they were gone. All that remained was the truth, and the truth had a power no laughter could drown. When Maria folded the letter and set it on the table, the silence in the room felt heavier than any words. It wasn't the comfortable quiet of respect yet. It was the stunned silence of people realizing they had laughed at the wrong man. I scanned the room slowly. Faces that had been bright with amusement minutes earlier were now pale, uneasy. A few stared down at their plates, suddenly fascinated by the frosting on their cake. Others avoided my eyes entirely, guilt written across their features. My manager was the first to speak. his voice unusually soft. I I didn't know, he admitted. I don't think any of us realize just how much you've done behind the scenes. One of the younger employees, a man I'd mentored years ago, raised his hand slightly like a schoolboy asking permission. I remember, he said. His voice cracked. When I messed up that client report my first month here, you stayed until midnight helping me fix it. I would have quit if it weren't for you. A lump formed in my throat. For so long, those moments had felt invisible. To hear one remembered, it was worth more than any plaque or gift card. Another coworker, a woman who had once teased me about being old school, shifted uncomfortably. I made jokes today, she confessed, eyes wet. I thought it was harmless fun, but now I see it wasn't funny at all. I'm sorry. Her words cracked something open in the room. One by one, people began to speak. Not loudly, not in a rush, but in small, hesitant voices. Memories resurfaced. Times I had covered shifts, times I had walked them through confusing tasks, times I had listened when no one else would. I didn't realize. You always had our backs. I should have thanked you years ago. The room felt different now. Not a party, but a reckoning. I stayed quiet, letting them speak. For once, I didn't feel the need to fill the silence or soften their guilt. I wanted them to sit with it, to feel the weight of what they had overlooked. Finally, Maria from HR cleared her throat again. This letter was meant for today, she said firmly, because retirement isn't just about ending a career. It's about honoring a legacy. And what we've just heard, what we've just realized, is that this man's legacy isn't small. It's woven into the very fabric of this company. Applause began, hesitant at first, then growing. But this time it wasn't polite or obligatory. It was genuine, heartfelt, carrying a depth that hadn't been there before. I stood tall, not smiling smugly, but quietly. This wasn't about revenge or humiliation, it was about truth. And truth had finally been spoken aloud. Afterward, people approached me individually. Some shook my hand, others hugged me awkwardly. My manager, usually stiff and formal, clasped my shoulder with both hands. I'm sorry, he said simply. We should have seen you. We should have valued you more. I nodded, meeting his eyes. Now you know, I replied. Walking out of that conference room, I felt lighter than I had in years. The laughter that had once cut me down no longer mattered. What mattered was that they finally saw me, not as the punchline of a joke, but as the foundation they'd been standing on all along. And that, I realized, was the respect I had been waiting for. In the days after the party, I kept replaying the moment in my mind, the sound of my coworkers' laughter fading into silence, the shift in their eyes when the letter was read, the apologies whispered like confessions. For years, I had wondered if my work mattered. I told myself the steady hours, the missed dinners, the quiet sacrifices would be remembered, even if no one said it out loud. But as retirement neared, doubts crept in. Would I leave without anyone truly knowing what I had done? That letter was my answer. Not a complaint, not revenge, but a mirror. A reminder of what invisible work really looks like. And judging by their faces, they needed to see it. The truth is, workplaces change. New technology arrives, young employees bring new energy, and older workers often get pushed aside, treated like relics instead of resources. I felt that. I lived it. I wore the sting of being told in subtle ways that my time had passed, but I also knew something they didn't. The value of experience, the knowledge you can't Google, the wisdom that comes only from years of trial and error, from mistakes and recoveries. That's what I had given them, and what too many companies forget when they dismiss people like me. After the party, younger employees began stopping by my desk, not with jokes, but with gratitude. One said, I want to learn to have your patience. Another asked if I would mentor her even after retirement, just to have someone to call when things got tough. And in those moments, I realized something important. Recognition doesn't always come when you expect it. Sometimes it comes at the very end, or even after you've gone. But that doesn't mean it isn't real. I also realized I wasn't alone. There are countless people like me. Quiet workers who hold everything together without applause, who stay late without being asked, who keep promises no one else even remembers were made. They are the heartbeat of every office, every company, every team, and too often, they are invisible. If you're listening to this, and you've ever felt unseen, know this. Your worth isn't erased just because someone fails to acknowledge it. Value doesn't vanish in silence. It waits, it endures, and when the truth finally comes out, it shines brighter than the laughter that once tried to drown it. At my retirement party, I was laughed at, but by the end, I was respected. And the respect mattered more because it was born from truth, not ceremony. I walked out of that building with my head high, not because of balloons or cake or speeches, but because at last they understood. And maybe, just maybe, the next time they see someone quiet, steady, a little older, they'll look closer. They'll remember the man who once stood in that room, holding decades of invisible work in his hands, and they'll think twice before turning it into a joke. That, I realized, was the lesson they needed to hear. Today, when I think back to that retirement party, I don't remember the laughter with pain anymore. I remember the silence that followed, the shift in their faces, the way respect finally filled the room. Sometimes it takes one moment of truth to erase years of being overlooked. And sometimes that truth has to come from us, spoken, written, shared, so others finally see what we've carried all along. If you've ever felt invisible, know this. Your work, your love, your presence, it matters. Even if no one claps, even if the thanks come late, your legacy is already woven into the lives you've touched. If this story moved you, please like, share, and subscribe for more stories that honor the quiet strength of those who refuse to be forgotten.